Hello, and welcome to the Project Elected podcast. Project Elect is a nonpartisan nonprofit whose goal is pretty simple. We want to get more Latter-day Saint women involved in public service. On this podcast, we interview amazing Latter-day Saint women who are involved in public service. Hi, my name is Audrey Perry-Martin. I'm the founder of Project Elect and the host of this podcast. I am here today with Representative Marsha Judkins, who is in the Utah State Legislature, and she's been there for about 6.5 years. She has an incredible story, and I'm excited to chat with her today and get some insights from her on her time in the legislature and running for office. Thank you so much, Marsha, for being here.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm excited.
Tell me a little bit about your background. How did you end up in the state legislature? As I know, Utah doesn't have the highest percentage of women. I think we're 40th in the state or something like that in state legislatures. What was your journey? How did you end up there?
Journeys, where do they start? I grew up in a family that was pretty politically inclined, and my dad was a Republican. My mom was a Democrat. We had a lot of feisty discussions in our home about politics. And I know that's not the way of a lot of families. So I feel like I got a head start there with being really interested in policies and how they affect families and different things. I got a degree in political science at BYU, but it took me a long time. I settled on that because I started BYU, got married, started having kids, and I was majoring in math. And then I majored in music. I was trying to figure things out, but having kids, it was really hard for me to have a consistent schedule with school. I was skipping semesters. And so I just looked and said, what's the shortest way out of here? And it was political science. And so I got a degree in that, and I actually really loved it. And I've always been very active in my community. I was very active with PTA, and I was the neighborhood chair, and I was their registrar or whatever for voter registration, and just all these different things because I like to do that. I like to be involved. And I have 7 kids, and many of them deal with different kinds of maybe mental health issues. A couple are on the autism spectrum and Tourette's and I don't know, ADHD and just a whole bunch of different things like that. So they struggled in school, and I felt like there was a disconnect. I was very involved. I was able to be a stay-at-home mom, which was very helpful because I could, really be involved in their schooling, which was important because they had a lot of behavioral issues and different things. But I felt like there was not a lot of representation for my area on the school board, and there was a disconnect. My dad was a school teacher, disconnect between the teachers and the administration and parents. And anyway, so I was very interested in running for the school board. So I decided to do that. And like a lot of women that I talked to, I didn't feel exactly qualified. And so I went back to school and got a master's in public administration so that I could feel like I could do a good job. And I don't think that's necessary looking back, but we all have a lot of imposter syndrome. And so anyway, I did that. And then I ran for school board, was elected. I served in that position for 4 years. And I realized during that time that the legislature really had the final say in what schools did. And the relationship between here in Utah, the relationship between the legislature and education has been very rocky. And I thought that my perspective might be important. And so I decided to run for the legislature. And a lot of times people will say, so many people asked me to run. Okay, not that many people even mentioned it to me. I wish I could say, yeah, so many people just wanted me to run. But people were really supportive when I said I was going to run. But if I had waited around for a lot of encouragement, it never would have happened. And I won. And so there you are.
How has it been being in the state legislature? Has it felt like you're able to move the needle on some of these education issues that you wanted to, or is it harder than you thought? What do you think?
It is harder. It's difficult. And I like to believe in the butterfly effect. And so that kind of keeps me positive. I'm a pretty optimistic person anyway, but what I hope is that every little action does create waves, and they can get bigger and bigger as time goes on. And maybe you don't see the result right away, but I hope that there's something at the end that's positive, and that some of the things that I've done have turned the needle just a little bit. The relationship between education and the legislature still is pretty rocky here in Utah. But I do feel like I've spoken up, and hopefully that's made a difference.
Well, you have a vote. You have a voice in the room too. And that absolutely does make a difference.
And I will add that just having a woman in the room changes the conversation. When I was elected, I was the only female legislator in Utah County. There's probably around 18 or 20 legislators from Utah County. And we'd have our little meetings together. They would start talking and then they'd notice me and they'd be like, oh, and they would maybe change the conversation a bit. We have different experiences than men in life, and we tend to have different priorities than men do. And it's not that either one is wrong or bad. It's just that if you don't have women in the room, those priorities don't get the same attention at all.
And life experience and perspective, and it's 50% of the population, right? And if you're not, if you don't have anyone speaking out for that perspective, then you're missing a lot.
You can't blame men for not knowing a woman's perspective necessarily. They haven't lived that life. They don't see the same things.
That's challenging being the only woman in the room. I've worked in politics for a long time and found myself, not as much anymore, but definitely when I started, I was often the only woman in the room. It can be an intimidating place to be. How do you deal with that? How have you dealt with that in your 6.5 years in the legislature? And have you seen any shift?
So we do have more women elected from Utah County now. I think I'm one of 3 currently. And there might be more coming up. So that's good. Something that I think that's been helpful for me is that in my family as I was being raised, there were 3 girls and 4 boys and my mom and my dad. And my parents treated us all just pretty much the same. They valued all of our opinions the same. We all had to do all the same jobs. There just wasn't a difference. They never thought, oh, you need to go into this field or anything like that. They thought all of us could do anything. They were very proud parents. And it wasn't true. We couldn't all do everything, but they made us feel like we knew that they thought that we could. And they encouraged really great conversations. And so I'm generally not easily intimidated by men or position or power. I feel very lucky because I just grew up in that sort of environment. And I think it really was helpful. Not to say I'm never intimidated. I am. There are some bullies up at the legislature and in all areas of life. And we tend to want to avoid those kind of confrontations. But if you have something that is more important, if you have a policy or an issue that you think is more important than your own sensitive feelings or whatever, you're just going to plow forward as best you can.
Yeah, just do it. I like how you brought it back to your parents and how they raised you. Were there any specific things that they did or didn't do that you think contributed to that? I've got 3 daughters and I think a lot about, how am I raising my children so that they would feel comfortable in a room if they were the only woman, or if they are in a position like yours, how would they react and make them willing to even go for that? So what do you think in your life with your children and your parents, what did they do? What were some things that you think helped?
Wow, that's such a good question. I have to think back a long time ago. I'm getting old. I think it was just including everybody in all the discussions and treating all of our ideas as important as anyone else's, and encouraging us to ask questions about anything we had questions about. Both my parents were teachers. My mom was an elementary school teacher. My dad was a high school math teacher. And we had a chalkboard. We were a weird family probably, but we had a big chalkboard in our kitchen. And during dinner, my dad would put interesting math problems up on the board, or my brothers would ask math questions, or I'd ask it, and we would talk about them and work to figure them out together. And anything I wanted to do, they just encouraged me to try it. And back then, not that many things were open to girls, right? So it's not like I didn't see that there was discrimination. I was always very frustrated that my brothers got to participate in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and I did not. I thought that was very unfair. I saw other ways that my brothers got stuff from the world or society that I wasn't getting. But in my home, at least, it felt very, very egalitarian. My brothers had to clean the bathroom too, or I had to mow the lawn. It was just very we all went hiking and camping together. It just was very egalitarian.
That's a cool story. I love the chalkboard story. That's growing up with a math teacher as a parent, I guess that's what you get, right? And how they just treated you equally. So even if you were getting other messages outside of your house, at least in your home, you knew your parents saw you equally and saw you capable of anything. That's fantastic. So you have 7 kids. How did your children, your family react when you decided to run for office the first time and then state legislature? Because you were on the school board first, right? And then state legislature. So were they excited? Were they nervous? Were they, please, mom, don't do this?
That's such a good question. I can't say they were super excited. I waited until there's a time in the season for everything. It's really hard to be super involved in a lot of things when you have little kids at home. But I think my youngest 2, maybe 3, I guess I should go back and look, were still at home, but in high school when I first ran for school board. And I think they were proud. They didn't want to go walking doors with me or anything like that, but they did. They would a little bit. My husband actually, it was harder for him to understand why I wanted to do that. He's very introverted and does not like confrontation or hard conversations really. And I think he had a hard time thinking, why would you want to put yourself out there like that? But then once I was in it, I just was in it. And then to run for state legislature, I think my kids sometimes think that I do too much, like I stay too busy, but I like that. But they were so supportive, really and truly. I have grandkids now and they come out knocking doors with me, and that's really fun. And I really appreciate how supportive my family has been, even though sometimes they think I'm a little bit crazy. And interestingly enough, I teach math at Utah Valley University, and I do this political thing. My kids generally don't like math. They didn't like school, and they really don't love a lot about politics. So it's been very lucky within my family that I so appreciate, especially as I look around and I see other families and friends having difficulty this way. My family is very forgiving and loving towards each other, and they disagree on things and they can talk about it. And we will have very spirited discussions amongst my kids, still amongst my siblings too. We're all still pretty close, but we separate the issue from the person, which I think is really important. And we all just get along and love each other and have fun. And we have those discussions that can be pretty heated. Sometimes my kids-in-law are like, ow. But my family is really used to being very boisterous, and then we're all good. We talk about it and then we're all good. And that actually has been a really wonderful thing for me in politics. I can separate the issue from the person, and I truly like and love almost all my colleagues, even though sometimes they do things that just, I think, what are you thinking? I think I grew up in that type of a family and home. It served me really well. I feel like, I don't know, I really appreciate that.
It seems like that might be one of the things we need the most in politics right now, is the ability to have more people have that ability to separate the issue from the person, so that you can actually talk about the issues without, I don't know, trigger maybe isn't the word, but people hear an issue or a side and they automatically have all their responses or ideas and they won't talk about it or find any common ground.
That's really important. We pretty much all basically want the same thing. We want good quality of life. We want healthy, happy families and kids. We want the same things. We have different ways of going about it. And sometimes it's very different. And sometimes we can look at what somebody says and think, yeah, you absolutely have lost your mind. But it's their experiences that have led them to that place. I just think love is the answer to everything, right? So if we can see that person as, even if we want to consider that they maybe have lost their way or whatever, maybe we're the ones who've lost our way, but we don't see it. But if we can just see them as people who are trying along in the same life that we are. And I think that's really important.
And I think that's such a strength to have in politics, is to, a lot of the women I talk to on this podcast mention love and like leading with love and having that be the overall feeling that they try to emulate, is like this Christ-like leadership and love and bringing people together instead of getting offended. And those sorts of things are very missing. That love portion is very missing in politics these days. And
it is. And it's hard. It's difficult because we are getting so entrenched in our camp. And I love the idea of Adam Grant, that he has a book and it's called Think Again. And we just need to really be able to rethink our positions. If someone comes at us with something that we just no way we think that could be a correct way that they're going about something or their ideas are completely wrong or anything like that. We need to just open our minds to rethink that and think, I want to explore that with them. I want to be curious about how they came to that because we can learn from everybody and we have to be willing to just have open minds. And sometimes we think, oh, compromise or this or that. To keep our integrity, we have to just be completely certain about where we are. But certainty rarely leads to truth and it can lead to totalitarianism. And so we just need to always be willing to listen and be curious and do our best, to love that other person.
Yeah, I love how you say that. And I love how you talk about you could be the one in the wrong and just not see it too, right? And knowing what you don't know and that the person is coming at it not from some evil place, but from the place of their life and their perspective and their lived experience. And there's probably a reason for why they think the way they do. And if you're not willing to listen to that, you lose a lot by not being able to engage in that kind of dialogue and realize maybe you want the same thing and maybe there's a way to come about it that you both can agree to. That's missing a lot.
Those have been my favorite bills to run at the legislature is when I'll hear from one group or have an idea or something, and I think I'm so right. Or this group, I just have sympathy with this particular group. And I think, oh yeah, this should be obvious to everyone. This is the way we should do it. I always believe in the more people at the table, the better the decision. So then I go to the other stakeholders thinking that they're probably in the wrong because they're going to be against it or whatever. But then they'll give me a perspective and I'll think, oh my goodness, I hadn't thought about how that affects this other group. This would have an unintended consequence. And to get two groups that seem opposed to each other on opposite ends and to get them all at the table and figure out, and it can take months. I've spent months, even years on some of the policies that I've in bills. When you finally get that kumbaya moment where we're all just, this is what we can all live with. And it moves us forward on this issue. And it just feels so good.
That's fantastic. I love that. And you really are accomplishing something there. It's not just taking a rubber stamp and trying to pass legislation. You're actually trying to find common ground. Going back to what you're saying, our world's so complicated. Our society is so complicated. It's really impossible for one person to know what's best and know all the consequences of every piece of legislation. And it's so important to be able to listen to both sides. So I appreciate that you're that type of legislator. I want to talk a little bit about women running for public office. Do you think it's important? I mean, we talked about how being the only person in the room is hard, the only woman in the room, but how can we encourage more women to run? And what do you think is holding them back?
Oh, this just a resounding yes. More women need to run. More women need to be in the room where decisions are made. I think it is so important. This is the $1 million question. How do we get that to come about? The incumbent advantage is real. This is not going to be popular with some people, maybe, but when we have men who keep running and never move aside, that makes it extremely difficult for anyone to get in the door. Someone who is young, someone who is in a minority group, a woman. So honestly, I think the best thing to do is for people who are public servants who realize, hey, I'm maybe not as important as I think I am, and I can step aside and let someone else step into this. And maybe not hand pick them, because I see that happen all the time too, where they hand pick a successor, throw their support behind that person, and then you just get almost a carbon copy of what you had before. And it still doesn't open that up for more people to join. I can't fix that, right? I just wish that people would see that people who are in office would see that. But I think that if women can see themselves as, when they start thinking about who would I like to have as my representative, or who would I like to have as my mayor, who would I like to have on the city council, who would I like to have on planning commission, whatever it is, think of yourself or think of your female friends. Because a lot of times we automatically think of men, right? And we need to change that and start thinking of women. I'm not saying we should kick all the men out or anything. We need everybody at the table. But I think that we really need to start seeing women as potential candidates for one thing. So something that is extremely helpful to anyone who's running for office is to have people who support them in all kinds of ways. Getting a sign in your yard, knocking on doors for somebody, giving a financial contribution. Those things are all really empowering to whoever is running for office. And so if there is a woman that you support, that you think would be good in office, don't just talk about it, like actually do something to show your support for that person. Also, after you think of the person that you think could run for office, maybe go say, hey, I see you as someone who would be really good in this position. And a lot of times, here's my pet peeve, because I see it in myself too. And I've had long conversations with my kids about this, but we often, if we look at a resume, we don't consider the time that a mom stays at home with their kids as important or as vital or as relevant as someone who has been a CEO or has done this or owned that company or whatever. My kids and my experiences as a mother have just informed my decision making at the legislative level and on the school board. I feel like I make good decisions because of the experiences that I've had as a mom. I have sympathy. I have empathy because of my own struggles. I know about the criminal juvenile justice system because of my kids. There's things I know about that make such a difference in my ability to make good decisions. And so when we look for those women or at ourselves as possibilities for running for office, don't discount the stay-at-home mom or the mom who's just worked part-time at a library for a while or whatever it is. They have every qualification that you would need.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I get so frustrated because we ask a lot of women to run. And a lot of times I ask a woman to run. She's like, oh, my husband would be great at that. And it's just a perception change that, no, you're the one who's been in PTA and at the schools and sure, you're a stay-at-home mom, but you have all this experience in your community. You're the one who knows what's wrong with the schools, what your kids need, and all of those things. You need to be the one to run. And it's hard to get that message out there and have people accept it because, like you said, our brains do kind of default to the men because that's who we've seen in those positions and that's who traditionally has done it. So that's a hard paradigm shift, but so important.
Yes, you said that perfectly. Yes.
I also like that you mentioned people supporting them because I think a lot of women are maybe not going to run for office. That's not their path. That's not something they want to do. Maybe they're an introvert like your husband and can't imagine why anyone would do something like this. But they can still support women who are running, put out the signs and help them knock doors and make a contribution and all of those things that are so important that maybe if you're not the one who's out there, you can still really help move the needle and get more representation for women. We are unfortunately running short of time, but I really wanted to ask you, we always end with asking our guests for an invitation to our listeners, something that women who are listening could do in the next little while to move the needle forward, to help either consider a run for office or help someone else run for office, a woman run for office. Do you have something that women could do right now?
Wow. Yes. So it goes along with what we were just talking about, that maybe have in your mind, think about the women in your life, in your neighborhood, and who you think would be good at whatever level, whether it's city council or mayor or state representative or planning commission or community council at school, just something. And go talk to them about it and let them know that you have confidence that they could do that job and maybe put that little bug in their ear and see what they say.
I love that. We actually have a whole page on our website dedicated to this where you can send a woman a certificate that it basically says you are qualified to run for office and yes. Kind of just officially let them know. So we'll put the link to that in our show notes. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I love your perspective on things and your positive outlook and all the great that you are doing in the legislature. So thank you for being such a wonderful public servant and being willing to come talk to us about it.
Thank you, Audrey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all for listening to the Project Elected podcast. For free resources and materials, head over to projectelectwomen.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as Project Elect Women. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate us, or give us a review on iTunes. So until next time, thank you.